I love this justice for Alizé. Let's do it. Let's bring Alizé back into the cultural zeitgeist. Like, absolutely.
I'm here to bring it back.
It's a different kind of drunk. It's a different kind of strong, for sure.
I'm a sleeper agent for Big Alizé, trained by the Parkers, lying in wait to bring it back into the zeitgeist. We will have to cut all that out, though, because we're not sponsored. No free game. Free game.
We're not sponsored by Alizé yet? Question mark?
Yet.
Alizé, if you're listening.
But we could be. So we wrapped up last episode talking about rum and how it was intertwined with the early history of slavery and the slave trade and the Atlantic trade. And we sort of started to touch on how that had fueled and often by design been intertwined with stereotypes about Black people and alcohol. And I think today, are we going to find out a little bit more about how we got these stereotypes exactly and how they played out?
Yeah, we can absolutely get into that. I think it'll be easier to kind of focus on this period of time between the beginnings of Jim Crow laws into Prohibition, because that's a lot of the core origin stories for some of the most harmful stereotypes that we get about Black people and alcohol. But I think I should probably start by rewinding a bit back to pre-colonial Africa, where it was pretty common to disavow drunkenness. Drinking was part of the culture, but to be a drunk was a bad look. The best thing you could be was a moderate drinker. Which makes sense. We talked about most of these alcohols being created are a lot of these low ABV beers and wines. So you're generally like celebrating or performing some kind of cultural, spiritual ritual, but more occasionally just kind of cooling off and getting some nutrients. If you actually look back in time, Africans across the continent had a pretty healthy view on just interacting with such a potentially like potent substance.
Yeah, I mean, in the first episode, a lot of the drinks we talked about seemed less like what we're used to thinking of as a hard alcoholic drink that you take to get sloshed, and almost much more like a sort of proto energy drink / nutrition shake, right?
Yeah.
That happened to have like a little extra zing at the end.
A lot of like delicious, basically like hard kombuchas, like more or less.
Hard kombucha.
Hard kombucha before it was cool. Yeah, it's like a generally pretty mellow attitude towards drinking. But then the Europeans show up and we start getting the transatlantic slave trade, and naturally, they wanted to have their cake and eat it too. So you have these people who are enslaving Africans and using alcohol as this procreation incentive, but then they would also dislike the ensuing alcoholism that cropped up. You plied them with alcohol, and now you're upset that they're a little bit unpredictable and addicted to these harder European distilled spirits. If you look into the pre-revolutionary American colonies, even in relatively liberal regions, they would forbid the sale of rum or other hard alcohol in general to Black people, free or not, out of fear, really. The reasons could be just the regular danger of a drunk person, but more often than not, the sentiment was that they would be harder to control if their inhibitions were constantly lowered.
Right. Like, think of your very wonderful, adorable, well-dressed friend who gets 1 to 6 too many little Alizés in her and is suddenly just telling you, your mom, and your dog about yourselves and can't really feel pain anymore. So you're mouthy, you're probably too strong, and you won't feel any pain until the next day. So like, yeah, that's a pretty dangerous individual from a certain perspective.
Yeah, especially an oppressed person. Like it's like, they might they might realize they they have their own power, huh? Maybe
Yeah, they're
none
going
of
to have a lot of
this.
business with you to handle.
Absolutely. I'm actually going to send you something from Frederick Douglass. It's an address, part of an address he made in Scotland in 1846.
Perfect. I love Freddie D's content.
The original content creator. A lot of people don't know that Frederick Douglass actually dealt with alcohol addiction and managed to maintain sobriety later in his life after being emancipated. But it's something that historians often downplay, kind of trying to separate this historically important Black man from this negative connotation. But yeah, he says something great here that really speaks to the reasons why people would be using alcohol against Black people. I'm just going to send it to you.
In order to make a man a slave, it is necessary to silence or drown his mind. It is not the flesh that objects to being bound. It is the spirit. Bars.
Yeah, classic Freddie D, bars on bars. So there's this feeling, there's this pendulum swinging between forced drunkenness and this externally imposed temperance. But the pendulum itself, it's just control. They just want to control this oppressed class of people.
Totally. I mean, it's a lot like the general conversations you get around insert thing here that tie back to respectability politics today for oppressed groups, whether it's the use or not using certain substances, dressing or not dressing certain ways. The kind of constant push and pull is always, well, whether I cover up or show a lot, I'm being used by the culture in this certain way, right? It's either you dress super straight-laced and respectable, but only because the culture has forced you to occupy that narrow little window of presentation, or you don't do that, and the critique you get is, okay, well, now you're confirming all of these stereotypes. And you're like, well, I just want to be free. And I think that it all ties back to the same thing of whether amount of choice and the amount of kind of carefree action behind something, right? Are you drinking a little or a lot because you're sort of being plied with alcohol to keep you kind of outside of your normal mental capacities and easy to control and easy to bribe with something or easy to deprive of something? Or are you doing it because you're a person who wants to have a good time and have relief and, kick back and enjoy something? And it still boils down to the same fundamental problem of being controlled and also having to think too much about whether or not you're being controlled when you engage in something, right? Like, I'm sure whatever landowning slave owner also partook in alcohol did not have to worry anytime they took a drink about whether they were confirming a stereotype.
They're just drinking.
Falling into dissolution.
There's no context to that. It's the norm.
Yes.
Well, to a certain extent, that actually, I feel like we should get into the temperance movement because that is actually a big part of this part of the history of Black people's relationship with alcohol. Before the American Civil War, many leaders of the temperance movement in the US were also abolitionists. It's not until after the war, when the movement gains traction more in the rural South, that's when it becomes more fueled with these racist ideologies. You get more of this fear-based action. And this is actually one of the core sources of the dangerous stereotype that Black men were drunk and wild and a particular threat to white women. Of course, this is like false. Famous investigative journalist Ida B. Wells, we love her, found that most interracial sexual encounters of the time were consensual and didn't involve alcohol at all. But, that's not something that can whip a white mob into a frenzy. So it's not good branding for the cause. So the stereotype kind of continued regardless.
So can we pause and talk about, like, at this point, what have been the kind of nodes in the timeline in terms of, or I guess, avoidance of drinking tied to a kind of progressive abolitionist sensibility, and then avoiding drinking being kind of co-opted by these racist institutions.
Yeah, so it really is like after the Civil War, when you get into Reconstruction era, especially in these rural Southern communities, there's a lot of resentment from Southern whites about this new equality that Black people had. So this is when they're starting to beef up these narratives that Black people couldn't handle their alcohol and that they would be dangerous imbibing or interacting with white people while doing so. So yeah, this is the general like 1860s to the early 1900s is when we're really starting to get this shift. In this kind of Reconstruction era, the slave codes were no more. So Black people could actually buy alcohol again. But other than initial kind of celebrations around emancipation, Juneteenth, things like that, most Black Americans didn't drink that much, even as these stereotypes are being built up in the background. During the Reconstruction era, they experienced only a third of instances of alcohol poisoning compared to white Americans, and they died from liver cirrhosis at a quarter of the rate of white Americans. And they mostly just reverted to this kind of pre colonial African cadence for drinking. Just life's big moments and then something lighter like beer for the moments in between. So, yeah, you have this direct contradiction being played out, but you're still getting these beginnings of intense segregation. So, there's not really a way for people, white people in particular, to know the truth of what this Black experience was and just accept these lies that are just steeped in fear and a desire to control other people.
Oof.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
I know.
It's hard to be funny.
I know.
It's hard to be
rough.
funny
It's
about
rough.
that.
But a lot of this is based in how Southern Black people were interacting with Southern white people.
So we've hit the period sort of after Reconstruction and for a good while afterward. And then the next kind of major point in Black American history is the Great Migration, right? And moving away from the South. So did the Great Migration play into this at all or change this pattern at all?
That's a great question, and I would love to answer that, but someone has to use the phone. I'll be right back. I'm back. I'm back, ready to answer your question about the Great Migration. So, just to continue following this timeline overall with Black people and temperance, early in the 19th century, many Black people were for temperance as a big part of their politics and revolutionary actions, but some left or were pushed out by this growing faction of racist people calling for prohibition in the late 19th century into the early 20th century. And this period kind of dovetails with those early decades of the Great Migration from the South to generally the Midwest. After Black people started moving north, they were faced with fun new forms of racism and discrimination.
Oh, yay.
Set against a backdrop of speakeasies and rollicking nightlife. And this is actually when we start to see an uptick in alcohol abuse and related diseases. But that really rolls into more of the mid 20th century onward. So I don't want to get too deeply into that, but this is kind of a turning point for the intensity with which Black people engage with alcohol.
So you've got this point where alcohol exposure is much more prevalent. And you're in the big city, right? You don't necessarily have I imagine down back home, if you throw back too much and start acting a fool, your grandma and cousin and niece and second cousin will all see you and report back. And that kind of like socially reinforced temperance.
Yes, the black community thing of like, if anybody sees you doing something wrong on the way home from school, by the time you get home, like that person has already somehow contacted your mother.
Yeah, like your mom is waiting with the belt. Took a couple minutes too to select the prime one for the occasion. Had plenty of time.
That stuff is always like so interesting to me. This like network of authority and kind of etiquette, because so much of it that I've even heard from my own parents is just like, oh, you didn't say good afternoon to Mrs. Wilson. I didn't raise you like that. Like, so I can only imagine the reaction for drinking alcohol or being out all hours at some local tavern or saloon.
Oh yeah. Back then, it must have been just considered a half a skip and a step from forgetting to tip your hat at the neighbor this morning to being on a literal chain gang, like knocking over banks.
The slippery slope. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So that's what's happening as we kind of get into the 20s and 30s in the Midwest. But we can't talk about temperance without talking about the Black suffragette Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. Or FEW. We love an important Black historical figure with just as many names as possible. It feels correct.
Man, we used to be all over the first name acronyms and initials, and we gotta get back to that. Don't bring anything else back.
Just more names.
Leave all that other stuff back in history, but like, just more names, more initials, more periods. Be like FEC. Ondelette, you know, just like a cool name. It's no gender, baby, only letters.
That's the future, actually. Yeah, just non-binary Black babies with just letters. It's a 6-part first name.
Oh, yeah, 6-part first name that's all initials. And you know what? Mutton sleeves as well. We can also bring those back.
You heard it here first.
Mutton sleeves for everybody. Blazing hot trend predictions from your favorite podcasters for 2025. It's
gonna be so ready. Funny when those do come back in inexplicably. So our girl FEW Harper was at a National Women's Conference in 1866, and she read all these white women for filth and called out their white feminism to great effect. Like Susan B. Anthony changed the name of the National Women's Suffrage Association to the American Equal Rights Association. Like she was gathered so much, she was like, actually, we do need to be doing more. And like our name needs to reflect that.
And friends, if you take nothing else from that, never underestimate the power of a good, thorough read. I mean, the kind of read that has footnotes and echoes through. Don't shortchange the power of a good read. Reading someone for filth gets results.
Her power.
God bless.
Yes. She was also part of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, where she led a lot of nonviolent pickets of saloons throughout the Midwest. And then she would also go on to help a lot of Black women form their own local chapters of this union so that they could organize action for their own communities separately and address their own issues. Basically an icon that I could not actually talk about temperance without bringing up. A queen, Julie. Mm-hmm.
Love her.
I'm generally anti-statue, anti-monument, I should say. Give her a statue. Give her a monument. Like a work of art, a little sculpture, that's fine. But I don't know how many men riding horses we need in parks across the country.
Sorry in advance to all the horse girls. I don't like or trust real life horses. Do not like or trust them. And much less a giant spooky steel horse or iron horse or brass horse. No, thank you. No, thank you very much.
I feel like you watched that that magic movie. It was like Make a Wish or whatever with Martin Short. There's a scene in this movie where I think like a horse or a real horse gets turned into a monument horse, and then towards the end it turns back into an actual horse, and I'm like, was this a triggering moment for you?
Nope, don't like that. I have not seen this movie, and thank you for this information because now I never will. Ooh, that's the stuff that nightmares are made of. Ooh, thank you and no thank you. Absolutely not. So no dead white guys, and certainly no dead horses being immortalized in statues for sure. But other than that, I do like a cheeky little statue. I do.
I could get into a whole side conversation about that Martin Luther King one where he just looks like it's so sexual from every angle.
It's so bad.
Like, I love that everyone tried to give it a chance. They're like, can we get different angles of this? And it's like, no, it's worse. Actually, it just gets more and more like inappropriate. You know what? He was a lover, not a fighter.
Wow.
Terrible. Lindsay, keep it in.
Tune in for the next episode, folks, if they don't come get us.
I'm not afraid. I said what I said.
All that to say, though, our friend FEW does deserve the most pristine, non-sexual statue that money can buy.
Give her her bronze moment. I feel like we're lightening things up a bit. I think it's time to move to entertainment, which feels lighthearted, but this is honestly going to be a lot as well. But we're gonna move through it because you're trying to keep things as light as possible, but we got to be as honest as possible. So we got to talk about minstrel shows. I feel like that should be on a soundboard. Just we should each have our own sigh. Just
yes, each of us doing our own little particular heavy Negro sigh.
Yes, just spiritual. You can hear our ancestors in the sigh.
Probably save us both a lot of time throughout the rest of this podcast.
Probably, yeah. There's a sigh supercut waiting to happen.
Oof, yeah. All right, let's do it. Let's get into the shows.
Minstrel shows were these really, really just awful vaudevillian sort of variety shows where white people would often don blackface and perform these caricatures of Black people for financial gain. So, something that doesn't happen anymore, at least that explicitly.
Not at all. They're definitely not book authors doing that as we speak.
But yeah, from these shows from, I would say, 19th century into the early 20th century were another source of fanning the flames of stereotyping the Black American experience overall. And this is where we start to get the archetype of this like lazy, drunk Black man just gradually codified as this like ecosystem of shows grows. This eventually reaches its peak in the racist propaganda epic, Birth of a Nation, that explicitly just goes out of its way to undermine the wave of Black politicians who briefly came to power during the Reconstruction era. I mean, they're depicted as incompetent and just wild drunks who like don't deserve power. And the D.W. Griffith film also pushed that false narrative that we've heard of before, that Black men were inherently predatory to white women.
So if you zoom out, what you're basically getting is the Reconstruction being actively culturally sabotaged by this sort of emergent, non-centralized, but very real propaganda campaign, essentially, right? And of course, people figured out, as many people today have figured out, that catering to racists, especially racists who have a lot of control of a lot of money and resources already, is a great way to make money and get free publicity, right? Like, playing on the fears and prejudices of people who are already in power is a great way to get eyeballs on your show and your performance and your movie. And it is also serving this very direct, I wouldn't even call it secondary purpose, of kind of undermining any sort of cultural and political legitimacy of Black people, right? It's super, super shitty. And being a person who watches a lot of movies and likes talking about movies and thinking about movies, it is very, very common to see Birth of a Nation on like film studies syllabi and in random video essays where they say, oh yeah, it's racist, but you know, we do have to acknowledge how groundbreaking and innovative it was from a filmmaking standpoint. And I just like to take this particular moment to say, I would not even deign to wipe my butt with that opinion.
Because you know what? No one does that for like Nazi propaganda films. No one's like, okay, but we should really think about the techniques used here and how they like the cognitive dissonance on just really wanting to separate out this sort of idea of white excellence, even in the face of like objective harm.
Yeah. And when they do that for Nazi propaganda films, they are very careful to say, we are studying this to know the danger of this kind of powerful visual rhetoric, right? Like how they deployed this and why you should be on the lookout for it.
Yeah. Reading it as a propaganda film instead of as some sort of masterpiece.
Yeah. But I'm also just like, you know, if we gave your average indie Black filmmaker like half the attention that people are still giving to Birth of a Nation, that would probably be overall better for society in about 11,000 different ways. Let's do more of that. But yes, to your point, that's when a lot of the racist imagery and rhetoric gets really like solidified and codified in the national consciousness.
So we start with this sense of fear and desire to control, and then the less control white people were able to exert directly, these harmful stereotypes get rolled into the culture, and it builds and builds until we get this film so we just kind of loop back around to the beginning, to this direct harm. Because, you know, Birth of a Nation is often cited as the reason the Ku Klux Klan comes back.
Yeah.
And now there's this codified perceived threat. So it's a much more militant and organized version of the hate group that would just go on to terrorize Black communities for decades more to come.
And you've got this dynamic at play, which always happens with performance and visual media, where if you ask a person directly, do you think this thing is real just because you saw somebody enact it on a screen or on a stage? They'd say, oh no, I'm not that naive. But people really are like that. You know, not excluding myself. We're all susceptible to that. So that means that you mentioned before that there is a lot of really intense, if not legally enforced, socially enforced segregation at this point. So your average white person in certain areas might not have ever even directly seen a Black person up close before. And so they see these things in movies and on stage shows, which often don't even feature real Black people, or if they do, those Black people are also forced to perform in blackface as caricatures, and going, oh, this is what they're like. right? And it might not even be a conscious thought, but it's like kind of baked into their brain at that point. So you get these people, like especially the people reforming the Ku Klux Klan, saying, well, this is a very real and active threat.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen it. And where they've seen it is things like Birth of a Nation.
Especially, I mean, you think about this time when Birth of a Nation is coming out, people are barely even getting used to the idea of moving images. I mean, there's the famous first like big silent film exhibition where people are running from this train because they cannot conceive of this new technology.
Yeah.
I will say, I really want to put a pin on this in at least a fun way, because ironically, one of the pioneers of minstrelsy was a white man by the name of Thomas Dartmouth Rice, and he died of alcoholism. You know, much like Chappell Roan, my kink is karma. So I really just wanted to include that this man got his just desserts eventually.
What can I say? You'd love to see it. I am petty. And that warms my heart.
I thought it might. It felt important for people to know that, hey, not everyone's winning here. As we're in this like late 19th century, early 20th century period, Black people could finally really get into the liquor business, whether it's distilling or selling. But naturally, with everything else going on, some white Americans didn't want the competition. Again, you have this resistance to this new equality. So there are often these county by county restrictions on who could open a tavern or saloon that really discriminated against Black owners, like especially in the American South. But what's funny about that is a lot of Black people weren't too concerned with this.
Oh,
because they're still like fairly pro temperance at this time, and with everything else going on in the zeitgeist, a lot of them don't want to really be too closely associated with alcohol and too closely associated with these stereotypes. I mean, you're starting to get like the origins of these myths of Black excellence and like needing to be kind of perfect in order to assimilate into society. But yeah, ultimately, the overall experience that Black people were having with alcohol was not one that was super codependent. There were certainly some instances of alcoholism, but it really was not the norm.
Yeah, it's complicated. Like we've both said at this point, it's both a positive kind of resistance to control, especially control by means of a substance.
Mm-hmm.
And it's wrapped up in broader respectability politics and all of the pitfalls of that. It's a nuanced little thing.
It's a strange kind of tightrope walk of what is the real relationship and what is the relationship that has been forced upon an entire community.
Exactly.
And how everyone has tried to push back against this, or in some ways even try to embrace it, or at least make it work for them in its own ways. Because you might not have a lot of tavern owners, Black tavern owners, or things like that, but that doesn't mean there weren't plenty of Black bartenders affecting drinking culture, because this was also the time where we start to get the rise of the cocktail.
Oh, ooh. Okay, yeah. So I want to know more about these Black bartenders and the rise of the cocktail. That sounds very interesting.
You know what? That's a way more fun conversation, and I would love to get into that. But there's a lot going on there, including very funny stories involving former presidents.
Ooh.
We can talk about that next time. We need to give that its own full block of time for sure.
Oh, I'm so ready.
I'm so excited to share.
I'm so ready for some cocktails and, most importantly, some former president tea. I'll be ready and seated. Let's go.
Definitely. So much tea, so many mint juleps. Get ready. Get locked and loaded.
I'm here for it.
All Mixed Up is a mixed media podcast hosted by Jay Fergus and Kasiemobi Udo-Okoye. You can support our podcast on Substack and follow Jay's cocktail shenanigans at Cheers MixJ on all platforms. That's Cheers MXJ. This podcast is edited by Lindsay, Zana, and our theme song is courtesy of Chris Bell. Special thanks go out to Michael Escanuelas, Jill Petrachik, and Austin Rusk. Thanks for listening, and remember to clink responsibly. Cheers.